Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Building Automation Systems, Smart Buildings, and 5 Ways to Make Them Cyber Secure. Today's presenters are Tim Vogel, VP of Connected Solutions for KMC Controls, and Lewis Parks, CEO of Ritify Security. KMC Controls specializes in building automation solutions that help customers increase operating efficiency, optimize energy usage, maximize comfort, and improve safety. Ritify Security provides cybersecurity for building controls and industrial control systems with a zero-trust solution that stops cyber attacks before they can happen. With that, I'd like to turn things over to Tim Vogel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present today. Thank you for your patience as I found the unmute button, which conveniently disappeared. So today, I want to start off by just talking about KMC Controls a little bit at first. We've been in the business for over 54 years. We're very, very familiar with the building space, the built space, and the technology that has gone into those buildings over the last 5 decades plus. Everything that we do is made in America. That's something we're very, very proud of. Here in Northern Indiana, I'm at the factory today. Our mission statement, our shortened mission statement, is to provide innovative and intuitive solutions from responsive and supportive people. And each of those bold words are extremely important and woven into everything that we do. It's just something that we're very, very proud of. We have a large number of employees with over 700 years of combined industry experience, over 150 system integrator partners throughout North America, and then another 50 worldwide. So again, as we talk about building trends or technology trends, and then as we transition over to Lewis around cybersecurity, we're coming from just a background that is very, very familiar and in the know, if you will. So today what I'll talk about is some of those connected building trends, anything from interoperability all the way through augmented reality, and then how all of that plays into the building cybersecurity space. Let's start with some of the present and upcoming building technology trends. If you're familiar with building automation or smart buildings at all, I'm sure you've heard some or all of these terms in the vernacular over the last decade. Interoperability obviously has been a huge part of the conversation in the last couple decades, but there's some changing dynamics in that space, as well as then how it plays through this very fluid and organic connection of all these new technologies. So I'm going to spend some time today going through each of these, and then again, how that plays into cybersecurity. So interoperability and even open source. So what's happening right now? So there has been, I would say, a breakdown in the market appetite around lock-in. So more people are looking for ways of how can I connect this system with this system? And one of the ways to do that is to promote vendors or solutions or protocols that are focused around interoperability. So there has been a growing adoption of these centralized protocols. I would say 2 of the leading ones have been BACnet, but then also Niagara or Tritium Niagara and the protocol that they use within their platform, which is called Fox. But something else that's been happening that I've been hearing the last couple years is this new advent of open source solutions, things that are openly published, openly maintained with a number of different vendors. I would encourage everyone to go and explore that. There are just a few vendors that are really promoting it heavily right now. But what's interesting about that is how that then, or why that matters, and how that kind of changes just the overall threat landscape, cyber threat landscape that is in the market. So first of all, the market is driving this more and more than we've ever seen before. They want to bridge these systems as easily and quickly as possible. This also means that vendors are starting to feel the pressure. Perhaps they've adopted some of these open standards like BACnet, or they've standardized on a protocol like Fox and Niagara. But now there is just this growing pressure to say, all right, not only do I need you to standardize on these protocols, but I need you to make sure everything is available, and not only to read, but then also to write, because I need these things to fit together, which then means that systems that promote integration are also growing. And Niagara is an excellent example of that because of their huge driver sets. And KMC has been a Niagara partner for many, many years. So this is all about, it just comes down to this, getting, having, and using the data that you want in the way that you want. That then flows into cloud and IT-based technology. There's a huge, 30, 40 years almost now of this OT or operational technology that's in the space that's communicating. I heard someone mention one time over barbed wire almost, just this kind of older standard. But what's happening is as IT comes into the OT space, it's beginning to replace these legacy systems. And now what we're seeing is in building systems, you have those barbed wire approaches right next to fiber and fiber optic and IP solutions. And so now, as IT gets involved, that also means that cloud is beginning to be more and more introduced. Interoperability, enabling all kinds of new possibilities, new kinds of vendors. But really, the cloud is growing as the preferred methodology then for visualization, reporting, and then ultimately data access. It's not all happening right at the building anymore. Now it's getting out of the building. And this matters because, again, it goes back to that foundational need that people have from this interoperability. How can I use my data? And when my data is now more available, the capabilities begin to explode around what you can do. There's a lower barrier to entry for new solutions to come in because now the access has improved like never before. And it also means that customers and end users can choose the way they want to go in ways they haven't been able to choose before. Again, as the appetite for lock-in, everything from a single vendor lock-in begins to dwindle, now people get to choose what they want. And so now there's more multi-vendor solutions, different vendors with different methodologies coming together and communicating. The other thing that comes into this is that consumer expectations begin to drive what the expectations in the commercial space are. And as we see things like simple things like Nest thermostats in our homes, Ring doorbells, people are then coming to work and saying, why can't it be this simple? Or why can't things work the way they work at home? And obviously there's different challenges in the commercial space, but nonetheless, those expectations are driving now more cloud and IT-based technology in our space. Now, as we get more data, as it's more accessible, analytics and AI becomes a huge part of that as well. So analytics have been around for a long time, but up until recently, it's been very manual. Again, we have to build ad hoc at the building what we want to see and how we want to see it. But with interoperability, increased access, and these analytic capabilities, people are now beginning to realize these new efficiencies that they're looking for. And analytics is machine learning or artificial intelligence is really just automated analytics at this point. My analytics are telling me that I need to fix this, this, and this, or change these set points. So machine learning or AI applications are saying, well, I'm just going to go ahead and change them. And so now we're starting to see not only energy efficiencies, but process improvements and maintenance efficiencies as well. So why this matters? There's a growing need for energy efficiency, whether it be from regulatory requirements or self-regulation in a way from corporations that are saying, we want to reduce our carbon footprint, or we need to reduce our energy spend because energy costs are going up. Whatever your end goals are, there is this growing need for efficiencies, and analytics and AI helps do that in a much faster way. But just like I said on the last one with cloud and IT technologies, there are so many more vendors and more competition coming into the space to give people more options to get exactly what they need based on those goals. So this growing need of data and the results is driving rapid innovation, which is very, very exciting. This is a revolutionary time to be a part of the industry. The way this looks, borrowing from our friends over at Nexus Labs, is you have your device layers. There's that sub-integration and network layer that's happening within the building. We're then going out to the cloud. APIs are pulling data and pushing data, and now we're visualizing it. We're providing fault detection and diagnostics. We're providing AI or automated system control. And all of this now is just coming together more and more. This is, in a lot of ways, kind of a utopia. There's parts of this that are already put in place. Seeing all of these combined together, that's the innovation that people are all looking for and that so many vendors are rushing to be able to provide. Now you have all this data, and this is the next thing around building technology. You have this data, it's available, you have the analytics, but now what we're starting to hear more and more about is this digital twin. It's starting out with 3D scanning of the environments, making sure that we can get a physical representation or images of what's in the space at any given time, or even outside the building as well, looking at rooftop units or just outdoor systems. We're seeing a lot of asset tagging or documentation repositories inside of these 3D scans or digital twins. But now we're starting to see more API-based, cloud-based, IT-based live data being brought into these 3D scans. Then the ultimate goal of a digital twin is to be able to do some future integration around physics data. So for instance, I know my space, I've scanned it, I have all of my information and assets in. If I remove this chiller, if I remove this air handler unit and virtually place this one in, how is that going to affect the space? How's it going to affect my efficiency, dollars in, dollars out? How can we make better decisions with this kind of information? That's where it's all going. It's really, really fascinating to see some of the early adopters in this space and how they're using it. But why does this matter? It's all about greater contextualization of the data and the systems, a complete and comprehensive view of that building, again, for decision making. And then this allows for the efficiencies on the remedial side, on the operational side. How can we fix something faster? Because we know exactly where it is, which ceiling tile to remove, for instance, to get up to your VAV box. Additionally, safer environments. We better understand what's going on in the space at any given time. And then when you have something like this, now you can more specifically pinpoint the value of any additional, or I'm sorry, any building asset that you're perhaps trying to buy or sell. So what this does is that means that the C-suites to the boots on the ground, everything is visible, everything is available to them, and all that data is available to them to make decisions, whether short-term or long-term. And then that digital twin lends into augmented reality. Augmented reality would not be possible without something like a digital twin. We're seeing consumer trends really move towards more AR and VR. Everyone, I believe, has seen Apple's announcement of their upcoming headset and the innovations that are happening around that space. It's beginning to be a higher quality experience, a more compelling experience, and industrial and commercial applications now are beginning to come out of the hype phase. If you followed augmented reality all over the last 5-10 years, there was a big push early on, thinking in terms of Gartner's hype cycle. That was all the hype. People are still trying to figure out, how do we do this? Well, what's happened now is we've gone through the trough of disillusionment, and we're beginning to go into that hype, or into the general adoption phase now. So I think we're going to be seeing this more and more. But why does this matter? It's not just cool. It's not just something that we get to say we're able to do for the sake of being able to do it, but it really provides better remote service capabilities. If you have a local building engineer that maybe is not quite as well trained, but is able to do some of the things that a truck roll would allow them to do, if they had something like augmented reality and a remote person that could walk them through it more tangibly, just as if they were there over their shoulder, that's going to add huge amounts of efficiencies. It's also going to greater empower the limited workforce that we're seeing. Labor strains are all over the place. Everyone is struggling with that. Something like this makes it, again, much easier to deal with that over the coming years. And then also allows for, with digital twins, better planning and decision making as we go about. So this mixed reality of physical spaces and real-time data is coming. I think this is, again, we're looking out a ways still as we just begin that adoption curve, but it is fascinating, and it's something that we need to take into consideration. So when we look at these technologies, again, you can see how they're fluid. Hopefully I've painted a picture of how they're all interconnected, how you can't do analytics until you have better visibility into the data, and you can't get better data until you have better interoperability. And at the end of the day, the goal is to have things like digital twins and workforce empowerment with things like augmented reality. So with all these things coming in, new vendors, new innovations, security is the problem. That's the big question that so many people are trying to solve. And not only these new technologies, new vendors, but now 30 years of legacy also to contend with. So that's really ultimately the reason that we're having this webinar today, to talk about the things that KMC and Veridify are doing together. And I'll be turning it over to Lewis here in a moment, but I also want to make a brief mention of buildingcybersecurity.org, where you can go and learn about the broader space around how building cybersecurity frameworks are being built to think more holistically about everything that's in the building space. And then ultimately how KMC and Veridify can work around those assessments to give you the solutions and to be the remedial linchpin in making sure that you're as secure as possible. So with that, I turn it over to Lewis. I'll see you at the Q&A.
All right.
Thank you very much, Tim, for your insights. And Lewis, take it away.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Harry. Great insight and great introduction. The beginning of our presentation, we'll talk about why buildings are a target, but I think it's pretty obvious looking at all the great technologies that are being introduced, all of the data. Probably people have not realized how much data, how much connectivity is happening in the building space. So for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to present why buildings are becoming such a target for cyber attacks, the value possibly in protecting them. Some of you may have roles at buildings, at other vendors, etc. Discussion may come up with what is the value of addressing this now, because again, in many cases, it may seem early. We're going to present, as per the topic, 5 things you can do now, and I'm happy to say with a smile. Several of them are things you can simply do. You do not need to buy a product or subscribe to something to do a few of them. And we'll give you an idea of perhaps a different perspective on security and building security as we know it today. So again, just to quickly leap forward for my 15 minutes or so, some of you may or may not be familiar with Veridify. We are a cybersecurity company focused on device level security. So we focus on how to protect devices that are typically found at the edge of a network. Our client base is involved both commercial sector, public sector, schools, government, and DoD. And our solutions are focused on OT networks and the operational technology networks that manage where data intersects with physical devices in both buildings and arguably in industrial control systems and other smart spaces. We've been doing this for 18 plus years. Working with entities like the National Science Foundation to develop some of the technologies we have. And today, indirectly at the end, as an example, we're going to use Dome, which is a platform we developed in conjunction with our partners Intel and Amazon AWS to address the smart building and even the legacy building infrastructure space. So with that, let me try to advance things here and see that I have control. And Harry, do I have control?
Yes, I will.
Okay, maybe I do now. Let us see. So just again, a quick scenario. Many of you on this call probably are already familiar, but there is a lot of operational technology in buildings. Oftentimes, we're at meetings and people are talking about their HVAC systems, which have been prominent in cyber attacks because often connected energy efficiency is a big thing for buildings. So inevitably, it's one of the first things to get connected to an IT platform or the IoT. But as you can see from this not exhaustive list, there are a lot of technologies in the building, all of which come together to create an environment for tenants to reside and use a building safely. So having done that, so what becomes the issue? And I may not have. Okay. Well, if I advance that, then I guess I do have control. Anyways, thank you. Anyways, so what are the risks? Typically there are three categories of risks. We often think of risks, particularly from the world of ransomware and malware, as taking control of the system, denying you access, etc. And then arguably, either for the purpose of disrupting operations, and it could be in the case of a nation state, that is the goal. And often the case when it comes to data, it's about extracting some sort of ransom, whether it's in Bitcoin or otherwise. Same thing happens in buildings. This has happened globally where people have taken over buildings. In some cases, the purpose may be simply to disrupt the building. But don't let that be the sole purpose, because again, there may be no disruption. It could just be monitoring the building, knowing when people are in parts of the building for whatever purpose. It could be for the collection of data. It could be for creating false scenarios. There are many, many things that can happen to a building that create a cyber risk. And of course, as we connect, and as Tim showed you, the profound amount of connection that is happening today and is on the horizon, IT networks that have been around for 30, 40 plus years and developed strong cybersecurity solutions are unique when looked at against building systems, which have typically, as Tim used the term, barbed wired, air gapped naturally because they've had networks for decades, but they simply have never needed to connect to anything. So they haven't needed any cybersecurity. That is what's leading to a lot of what you're seeing here in terms of issues. And I will tell you that these issues are issues today. So if you're thinking, do I need to address this or not, or what's going on? We update this from time to time. There's all sorts of interesting attacks that happen. These are some of our favorites over the last couple of years. There's financial impact and otherwise, which is usually the thing that gets attention. Most recently, and our offices I'm sitting in today are in Connecticut. So the school system in New Haven near me was recently attacked. 4 states, including Connecticut, had hospital systems attacked. It's a weekly, if not daily, event. So again, there's a need on a variety of levels. And by the way, the need obviously goes beyond financial liability as listed here. Your buildings or your clients' buildings, if you are a vendor to the building industry, are responsible for the safety of the tenants. There's issues in terms of what it does to products and contents in the building. And again, the losses can be beyond financial. It can go to brand. Do you want to lease space in that building that was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal 3 weeks ago? Maybe not. And there's coming regulatory compliance. Even in the last week, the SEC announced new cybersecurity reporting requirements for publicly traded companies. And I do believe these will be extended in the future because, again, much like in the old days where if your credit card data was hacked, there wasn't an obligation of notifying you. Our government did act, and now you must be notified. And I think similar scenarios are going to be coming here. So we should just talk for a minute before we look at our 5 recommendations that things are happening in the space today, many of which are IT-centric. So again, for decades, IT networks have been protecting themselves. They've been protecting the data, and they're protecting the devices on the network by providing visibility. They have been doing things like patching and updating. This is something that is rare in a lot of the building industry space, although we'll need to become current and systems that can do it as we want to address future things not contemplated yet from all this interconnectivity. Network segmentation, for those of you who are not in IT, is the ability to create digital barriers or fences around parts of your network. When most of the IT solutions now protecting buildings talk about protection, it's not protection in the proactive sense, it's stopping anything, but rather it's about limiting the damage. So network segmentation allows us to create a digital fence around an area of the network and stop an attack from going to other areas. So you'll often hear that there's an anomaly or an issue in the sales system. They try to isolate it there so it can't get to the financial system, can't get to other operating capabilities. Access into these systems is done typically through firewalls. Again, this is a decade old technology. And again, monitoring and even zero trust. And zero trust is probably the last thing, just quickly to get through the slide. Zero trust simply says, simply because you had the right password or two-factor authentication to get into the network, doesn't mean that I necessarily trust you the next time you issue a command. I may need you to revalidate or continually validate who and what you are with each step and process as you stay and or go through the network. Key item here that I think we need to keep in mind is that all of this is good and everything you do to protect the network is good. But I want to bring to a point that this is network focused. So again, if we were to revisit some of this, I would argue that network visibility is important in knowing what devices are on your system, because an IT leader wants to know if somebody brought a device from home and plugged it in. Many of us who work or are associated with the building industry are probably not worried about people bringing thermostats from home, but accessing our network could be an issue. So where does it leave us now as we look to our 5 recommendations? So with the current network-focused cybersecurity, what we see are important tools to minimize damage, but they don't actually stop or prevent attacks. In fact, what these systems, and you can go and you may be using some of them, and again, it's good and important to use them. This is not a criticism, it's just to understand what they do. They provide monitoring, they provide potentially anomaly detection, meaning, hey, I think something's bad happening on the network. By the way, the industry standard, not often published on these sites, is 14 days, according to IBM. So that's 14 days dwell time for an attack to be on a system before it's identified on average. Many demos will show you how immediately they can identify an attack in a presentation and demo, but when they're up against 0-day attacks, that may change. And again, visibility, and they tell you something is happening. If you're operating in the building space, you may not have an IT or cyber staff to go and address it. You may be a facilities manager, a system integrator in the building space. So again, these tools are important. Large organizations may have them, but I think the thing that drives home where this has left us is that last year, $262 billion spent in cybersecurity, and the results, first quarter of this year, attacks up 7%. So the issue has not gone away with all those tools that I showed you 2 slides ago. So let's turn and look at a couple of things you could do now, we suggest, and a couple of new things perhaps to investigate over the horizon. So in terms of the 5 things that we're suggesting happen, probably one of the most important things you can do is evaluate and identify the assets in your building. Visibility of what's connected to your networks, knowing what things are attached and where they are is critical. It's a first step to figuring out what could be an exposure. Maybe you didn't realize that somebody had tapped into your OT network for access. Many of these networks run on IP, like the internet, and can give them outside access. So doing that is critically important. Tim mentioned earlier in his segue to me, the Building Cybersecurity Organization. That's one of 3 or 4 groups who've developed constructs to come in and evaluate your site, give you a grade, identify what's going on, and then perhaps create a plan for you to better protect. But you can't protect things if you don't know what you have. That is a simple step that you can do through your current schematics, engineering, or vendors today. We think strong password management. This might seem like a no-brainer. I can't tell you the number of times we go to a customer site. We need to access the building management system to evaluate or gather some data, and we lift up the keyboard and we have the password. There are many systems on a network that need to be protected. Of course, in the IT world, we have all these great tools, from our phones to our tablets, for how to protect passwords. This is something that needs to be reviewed or updated. And by the way, typically left unattended because we have so many vendors coming in and different vendors that need maybe to get access that we're ignoring it. We want to limit device access. So again, it's not unusual for us to go somewhere know that we need to look at a panel or something, we get in. Many vendors who visit buildings get in. As a matter of fact, this leads to a common problem in the network-focused solutions that look for anomaly or unusual activity. An unannounced vendor on the network will trigger a range of alerts, even though that may not be attack. And the problem there is you then get alert fatigue. When am I really being attacked versus is there an unannounced vendor? So having limited access, controlling that physical access, which will then help you, and if you're using one of these alert systems, at least maybe better identify when you're under attack versus when that vendor is possibly there working on your networks. Let's go to the next slide. Something that we don't often see, we would never think about working with our IT systems without a backup. We don't necessarily see this in a lot of building management systems, particularly the ones that are housed in the building manager's office, typically a PC sitting on the floor beside their desk or some way there managing their data. The data in many of these cases now is being connected and or collected by the primary vendor or system integrator. So you do have the data, but the failure to have backup systems can be significantly impactful. 2 years ago, I attended a function where somebody's building had been attacked. And 3 months later, they were still trying to get a system online so they could use the multi-story building because they lacked a backup and needed to reconstruct the system from scratch. Something that we would all be surprised at if your accounting system was hacked and you needed to put up a backup. We all believe that it's there, etc. So again, we don't think about our OT systems that way, but I think it's a critical step. And you know, if you called your building or if you're a building vendor and said, "Do I have a full image backup that I could restore operations from?" We're surprised the number of times not there. So these are 4 steps that you can take now. Arguably, the first one possibly with an outside vendor that may add a lot of value to that summary or that review. And the 5th item is sort of our introduction of another category that we think is important because, as I've already said, IT-focused, IT-centric solutions that are being used today to monitor, provide visibility, and giving you actionable data, all terms you'll find on their website, work when you have a full IT and or cybersecurity staff on site and or ready to respond, as well as the goal in protecting data, none of which they do in the building, i.e. they don't encrypt and or protect data, which is something you would never have or not work without on an IT system, is not addressed. I think device level security, which is an area that we operate in, how you protect the actual devices in a building or at the edge of the building, both as a secure enclave or independently, is, I think, critical, which allows a building to continue operating and brings a different focus to how security is delivered. As I say, we do it. I encourage you to look for other systems out there. Of course, I'm intimate with our system, so I can speak to it. Coming slides as an example. But again, you know, if you believe this is something of value to your operations, you should be looking at it. So very quickly, zero trust framework means something a little bit different here. In the device level solutions, all the data packets in this particular case will typically be encrypted. So this is not something that's happening under your standard BACnet to the edge device. In coming solutions like BACnet Secure Connect, between the controllers, you will have data protection. But again, every data packet being authenticated and then decrypted and given to a device or used inside a device is probably critical, because just because the last data packet was valid, you don't know where the next one is necessarily coming from and should be addressed. Device-to-device authentication. So again, how do you trust devices? On many of these networks, BACnet and Niagara, as Tim mentioned earlier, these devices can talk to each other. So a port that may be working with a VAV or a FlexStat, a thermostat in a room, probably can see and or talk to an access control if it's on the same network. So device-to-device authentication is important, so all the devices can trust each other on the network. And then finally, data protection and encryption. This has not been something that's been pursued. to the edge of a building. And arguably, if not all the devices are protected, only at the controllers up, you tentatively have a backdoor into the system, either to see data or to inject malware. So we think it's important, again, at the device level to look to the edge of the building. How or in what way am I protected? And if not, going back to the first recommendation of the 5 is at least understand your exposure, your risk, and what is there, so you can mitigate it to the best example. Just 2 quick slides to show you what a device-to-device level solution would look like. This first slide here, and again, you can buy systems or will be able to buy systems, whether it's a BACnet SC with our Dome technology embedded. There's a variety of vendors, including our partners, KMC Controls today, that we work with in terms of embedding. There are ways of retrofitting, so you do not need to remove all of your solutions today in terms of HVAC access controls. That litany of OT devices on my second slide. You can retrofit with devices. In our case, we have a Dome Sentry. There are some other solutions that will lock down components of your network and provide immediate protection. That is, again, with a zero trust framework as listed here, actually authenticate the data before it reaches an already installed device. And if authentic, then allow it to operate. So again, this is packet by packet real-time protection that you can look for in the market space. And again, it's very, very simple. There are typically 3 components in our case, and in many cases, there's a SaaS dashboard, which gives you important information of what's happening in the space, including email and text alerts. A Dome interface appliance, typically managed in this case by something called a KMC Commander, which is like a traffic manager at a campus or site in terms of the data, gives you important control capabilities, some of which were referenced in Tim's discussions about the various components of monitoring, managing, operating. And then finally, Dome Sentry, the ability to stop attacks. So again, we see in many of the IT solutions, because you're privy to an IT staff and cybersecurity staff, once you've segmented or frozen the area of the attack, you can go deal with it. We don't think many buildings have that luxury. So we're looking at solutions that actually authenticate the data packets and stop using in this zero trust. Probably a focus should be to minimize the IT and cyber security need for it. And again, these are just characteristics of things you should look for. And by the way, if you happen to work in the government or DoD space, critical element we do, and there are some others that do it, is not have a cloud connectivity. We're all leveraging the cloud, as Tim referenced, but that may not be a ready available solution if you're working in the government DoD space. So we've talked a lot today about data and technology and making buildings cyber safe with all this new technology interconnectivity. Some of you may go, that's great to know, thank you very much, and move on. But we think there's true value in doing this now, and value either to your customer, to your building owner, or to you, the building owner. We think that, you know, protecting tenants' revenue in the case of commercial buildings and the assets inside is critical. So it may not be a revenue attack, but sadly, we've seen what happens when cyber attacks have happened on hospitals in terms of protecting the assets there, as well as not only tenants, but the occupants, which in that case are patients. We believe that going forward in the future, making your building cyber safe, whatever means or mechanisms you choose to do, will add value. If any of you are familiar with the LEED framework, which is related to energy efficiency, many of us see this in the lobby of buildings you'll enter. We know that it adds up to 7% of value to the asset. And we believe that in the future, some of the organizations that KMC and Verify are involved with in doing these certifications will add value to your building. And in adding value to your building, may embed value to lease offerings. That is, if your building, your customer's building, has cybersecurity technology in place to protect the network that the building next door doesn't, maybe you get to be the tenant for that. As I've already mentioned, there are already cyber laws in place at the federal level. And by the way, I believe it was the middle of last week, initiatives, again, at the federal level from the SEC in terms of reporting. So not only do you need to do things, but you need to tell people about it. I know that locally, for example, the state of New York last week announced over $600 million of cybersecurity initiatives for the OT infrastructure space. And I think we'll see this at state levels too across the country as attacks become more and more predominant. This is something that's put out by several of the industries that we go to. If you're a large enough organization, and there are several insurance companies participating now in looking at the cyberspace because they need to write, excuse me, policies that take this into account or exclude it. And we know one of our larger clients with the production moving from pilot to production, one of the first things they're doing is going to their insurance carrier to see about reductions in some elements of their cost. Again, that will be a case-by-case scenario. And finally, I think that what's really important is a lot of the solutions we see today, certainly a focus of ourselves, is to try and make the retrofit to existing systems easy in a way of lowering cost and raising value across the board in terms of operations and the asset. So we think there's a good use case to be made, whether it be to your board, to your customer, or whoever you work with in terms of managing buildings. So just summarizing today in terms of our discussions, as we've talked about, connected buildings and technologies are going to improve operations, as Tim explained, across a broad gamut of things. So the data is just the beginning. There's a lot of technologies from AI, digital twin, augmented reality that will help improve beyond just knowing, gee, am I really using energy as well as I can in the day, in the night, and what have you. At the same time, and again, we can go on and on about all the attacks on a daily, weekly basis. Connectivity does increase the cyber risk profile. So we think that the practice of good cyber hygiene, some of the things that we've recommended to do not involve licensing, buying or subscribing to a system as a starting point are critical. And then, of course, as we're suggesting, in addition to the network solutions, in order to protect and encrypt the devices and data that are on your network, look for solutions that are device focused today, particular ones that can retrofit to your existing systems, and consider adding them to your portfolio. This is not a zero sum, one solution over another. Anybody who's worked in cybersecurity for a period of time will tell you that it's a layered approach, much like an onion, which is how you get to your most secure place. So if you are using anything today, that is great. And with this point, we just suggest continuing to expand because things are happening in the area of cybersecurity and OT networks. And I think it's worthy of a continued review. So hopefully we've given you a good overview in terms of technology, what's happening in buildings, approaches to cybersecurity, some things you can do today, and some new things you might want to look at as part of your arsenal for cyber solutions. And with that, Harry, I turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Tim and Lewis, for your insights. As a reminder to the participants, please submit your questions on the Q&A button on your webinar control panel. We already have a few questions. And first question is, are the vulnerabilities in the building space manufacturer dependent or protocol dependent?
Lewis, would you like me to take this one? I'll take this one, yeah. So, in the, I'd say in the past, it was kind of a mixed bag. It was a little bit of manufacturer and a little bit of protocol. And largely this was because of the software solutions that were being put in and what sort of default passwords were being put in. Over the last, I would say 5 years, maybe, more vendors and manufacturers have started to default to the more secure side. And so that has eliminated some, not all, but some of the vulnerabilities that were introduced, I would say, from a manufacturing perspective. But really, I would say it's the protocols that are so wide open. There's been some good posts done on LinkedIn just the last couple of days that I could think of, looking at these open systems that are accessible from the internet, and it's coming from almost any manufacturer. but it's, thousands and thousands of these devices. But the security vulnerability is largely because of the way they communicate, which is going to be these protocols like BACnet or Modbus. So it's just kind of it's like an unsealed letter being sent back and forth.
Okay, thank you, Tim. The next question. I've heard of zero trust before. How does using zero trust stop attacks?
That one to Lewis.
I was going to say, taking Tim's cue, looking for my unmute button. So it's interesting. So again, zero trust is a very, very important thing, which I would say, everybody today seems to have zero trust, from shopping sites to security systems. So again, just as a very high level definition, zero trust means simply because somebody's passed some sort of security barrier or capability doesn't mean they should be trusted. In the old days, once you got inside the fence of an IT network, you had pretty much open access to it. So again, zero trust is meant to continually challenge both the person, the data, what have you, on the network as it goes. So I think it's important in the case of a network capability, you'll be challenged and challenged again in terms of entering it at the device level. We think it's critical that it be in place and not only trust the access of one device to the next, but every time a device communicates, it needs to authenticate who and what it's talking to. And something called mutual authentication comes into this, because I may be issuing a command or I may be gathering data. The device has to trust me, and coming back the other way, I have to trust the data I'm getting. So I think it's critical at that level. And with that in place at the data level, and there are ways of doing it, as Tim already inferred, part of our exposure is BACnet MSTP, BACnet IP until now has been an open platform. For those of you familiar with Wireshark, you could plug in and just look at the data packets as any attacker can. With zero trust put on it, not only can you ensure that the data can be trusted, but you can actually protect the data from that visibility. So implementing it is critical, I think, to protecting you at the edge.
The next question is there any reason to protect a BACnet MSTP system? It's older and it works, and why protect it now?
I can.
So, yeah. So I would say that there's different methodologies and there's different approaches to security. First and foremost, I guess just get to the heart of it. Defense in depth is a very important strategy. It's one that's going to make sure, based on what Lewis just said, make sure that each device is something that is secured, that is authenticated, that is made sure to be something that cannot be inappropriately accessed. And so when we look at IP, that's, I would say, easier to do and track just because of the nature of IP. And MSTP equally is as important, because those MSTP devices are controlling the same critical pieces of equipment that an IP device is controlling. So that's how I would answer that. Lewis, I don't know if you have a different approach.
So it's an interesting question. We are cybersecurity experts, and we have accumulated some building knowledge from our partners, KMC Controls, and operating the space for a few years. MSTP, was a non-IP token passing, as many of you on here would know. It's a lower cost to implement. And as a result, what we did not realize when we entered the market, starting with BACnet IP, how many people are still using it. So I think the fact that it's being so broadly used requires a response from a cybersecurity perspective. I think it's important to think about what it runs. In other words, it could be a building worth hundreds of millions of dollars and not the value of the device when it comes to what is the cost to protect it. And again, it is connected to a network. In many cases, it's talking directly to an IP controller that may be the access point that the attacker is looking for. So I think that even something as simple as MSTP, a non-IP platform, needs to be addressed as part of a security solution, as Tim has already said.
And a couple of questions, I'll phrase them together as a two-part question. First part is, how can you see if the firmware of a device has vulnerabilities? And then the second part is, can you do group firmware updates on the system? And I'm assuming that that is relating to Dome.
Sure. And by the way, there may be some technologies because KMC's, doing a lot on IoT at this point, but just briefly from a Dome perspective or a similar device perspective. So vulnerabilities of firmware on a device is typically a device-based solution. So a vendor who is producing a device needs to think about how they lock down that technology. Many of the microcontroller or semiconductor partners, a building vendor, OEM, will choose them for the fact that they can lock down their version of code on it. So that's what we refer to as on-device security, where we focus on device to device. One area that's critical now that Dome does support is a secure firmware update. This is a very standard thing in the IoT, often referred to as over-the-air, OTA, etc. We securely deliver a firmware update, which is critical because one way of attacking a solution, which has happened in the world, is the bad person puts in their firmware update to a device, allowing it then to take control after the device updates. So the first part of the answer regarding firmware is that should be part of the vendor's solution. How you securely update it is something that Dome or a device management solution like Dome should deliver or be able to demonstrate to you. Because again, one of the things the building industry has lacked for decades is the ability to update the firmware. It's whatever it went in with is what's there 15 years later. And we all know the world has changed. Tim, I don't know if you have anything from KMC that.
No, very good.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, can you protect all devices in a building if they use different protocols, or if you have a mix of vendors with older and newer technology? How can all of those devices, or can all of those devices be protected?
So from my standpoint, yes. So Dome is able to not only look at something like BACnet, but something like Modbus or TCP. It can encrypt all of those. And going back to that first question, manufacturing or protocol independent encryption is really a key aspect of this, because every building is as unique as a fingerprint when it comes to the kinds of devices that are in the space. Lewis?
Yeah. So great question, because it's funny. It's we all drive across bridges and you realize almost every bridge is a custom design job. It's not a one of three models, etc. And we see that in buildings other than new construction. Once you've got into a building that's X years old, different tenants have come in, maybe some of whom had their own net leases, so they build out 5 floors the way they want it. So you will get these mixed environments. It is possible. Dome certainly does it. If it's an all IP platform, some of the network protection solutions, of course, will work across the devices. Again, these are mostly monitoring and alert systems, not actual protection. But we've run in mixed environments, even with upcoming platforms for some non-IP things. So you can do it.
The next question, you mentioned about IT solutions coming into the OT space. But what if I don't have an IT staff or cyber staff available? What can I do?
So I would probably rephrase that question a bit if I were thinking about it, and that is, when you go shopping for a solution, if you're going to add cybersecurity to your building space, I think one of the considerations you need to have is what either assets and or what resources you have to own that solution. because there are many things that you could probably afford. You just may not be able to operate them, or at least operate them to satisfaction. So you should keep that in mind, because there are some solutions that will provide elements of monitoring or protection from an alert perspective. Some of the companies who sell those will actually sell a service to then provide you the response team, which is a very good business model. And in some cases, you may want to look at solutions and understand that you don't need the IT or cybersecurity, because again, a common reframe we hear is, oh, I need to get into cybersecurity, but I don't understand it, or I don't have an IT staff. I may have a 30-story building, but I don't have an IT staff. Most commercial buildings don't. So I really can't do anything now. So there are some things, and I think it's important to understand that when you go shopping.
Yeah, and the way I would add to that is the way that KMC has gone to business, or gone to market rather, for almost our entire existence has been through system integrator partners. You know, there are partners out there that can help you do that. And the IT channel has managed service providers, obviously also very capable. So, you know, you could take parts and pieces of those services and those solutions, put them together, build a good team of partners that could help you with that. And certainly KMC and Veridify can help you find those solutions or those partners.
Thank you, Tim. We have time for just one more set of questions so that we could finish on time. I'll combine these together. How many devices can Dome protect in a single building or campus? And do I need to get one Dome Sentry for every device in my building?
Good question. So Dome is a SaaS cybersecurity platform. We do leverage in a commercial environment where we can connect to the cloud. You know, with a Dome interface appliance as the traffic manager, typically a KMC commander at that point, we can handle hundreds to thousands of devices. So again, you probably don't need to put a one-to-one for every device you're going to protect, but there's no issue in scaling in large buildings with thousands of endpoints to protect them. And again, the reason you can do that, to the second part of the question, is a portion of Dome can look after many devices, not just one, and talking back to the DIA or the KMC commander and reporting the security that it is delivering at the edge.
Thank you, Louis. And that's about all we have time for. And so thank you again, Tim and Louis, for your insights related to building controls, smart buildings, and cybersecurity. To the participants, if you have more information, you can contact KMC Controls or Veridify at the information on the screen. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. A replay will be made available shortly. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.